This program is made possible in part by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, using innovation and technology to solve some of New York's most difficult energy and environmental problems. And by
Paul Smith College, the only four-year college in New York's 6 million-acre Adirondack Park. More than 20 majors in topics including forestry, natural resources, sustainability, hospitality, culinary arts, and more. Online at paulsmith.edu.
And the Lake Champlain Basin Program. And with the generous support of these donors.
Climate change is nothing new anywhere in the world, especially in a place like this where we had ice ages coming several dozen times in the last 3 million years. What's different today, of course, is the causes of the changes and the direction they're going in, which we can attribute to ourselves.
How can we see our time, our role, our place as coming out of a huge story, this epic of evolution?
It's easy to feel really helpless a lot of the time, like you're just kind of a kid and all these things are happening. You feel a lot of the time like there's not really much you can do about it.
It's really a teeter-totter situation, and it's almost do or die. If you look at the projected rates, if we stop all CO2 usage now, it's still going up, and that's something that's really scary.
We can't be angry about that and then think that it doesn't matter. We have to take the action, be the bigger person, and we know that we didn't cause this, but we can fix it.
What's fascinating about climate change is that there's no part of the planet unaffected. 50% of the extreme weather events across the globe, high heat, heat waves, drought moments, from flooding in China and Thailand to flooding in the United States, were due to, in part, driven by human-induced events. The recurrence of extreme weather is a moment for us to realize we have entered this new age, this age of warming. In fact, the Earth's 10 hottest years ever recorded have all been in the last 14 years. Increasingly, we're looking for solutions to these problems in our natural world. And in the Adirondacks, this inland mountainous region that's been preserved for centuries, we're finding the answers. Yet significant changes are on the horizon as global temperatures continue to rise. A warming of 5 degrees Fahrenheit could change the climate of the Adirondacks to one like West Virginia. And a warming beyond 5 degrees is likely to take us to a climate like that of the southeastern United States. That will be a world that is really markedly different than the one any of us know, than the one maybe even human civilization knows. So preparing for that is a really big idea. That said, I actually think it's an opportunity for us to rethink from a systems perspective, from a whole resource perspective, how will we live? How will we redesign societies to thrive, to be resilient in this radically new world? And we got a glimpse of this new world most recently in the form of Tropical Storm Irene.
It was a nightmare. On that Saturday before, we were preparing for the worst that possibly could happen, August 27th, 2011. And on August 28th, the National Weather Service happened to call, and he says, prepare for the worst flooding in the history of the town of Jay.
What happened in Irene was just lots of water came through this area. We have very steep, very narrow valleys, and they filled really fast. And they filled faster than they had in many, many years in anybody's lifetime.
It was unbelievable devastation. Roads, bridges, youth facilities, water lines, sewer facilities, everything was just totally devastated.
There had not been an event of that type. It was not a big rivers flooding. It was all the mountain streams flooding. Some of them widened their channels 2 and 3 times in a couple of hours that night. All the boulders and trees came down the streams into the valleys. When they got to the culverts and when they got to the valley towns, they just simply plugged the stream beds up, and then the water came up over them and it took roads and houses away.
We seem to be having 100-year floods, 300-year floods every couple of years. And the rivers change its course of action, and weather patterns are certainly different in the Adirondack. So something's happening. I'm not sure if it's climate change. I'm no expert, but the damage from Irene is a weather pattern we've never seen before.
I just want to welcome everybody to the 2013 Adirondack Youth Climate Summit first planning meeting. Yay!
We're starting to decide what should be plenary sessions, what should be workshops, and how best to make the conference flow.
I'm Erin Weaver, and I was born and raised in Lake Placid, New York, and 17 years old now, senior in high school. The Adirondack Youth Climate Summit was started by a classmate of mine, Zach Berger. It was his senior project, and he just realized that there's all this negative talk about climate change, and he's like, why can't we do anything about it? I think he attended a summit that was all adults, and he's like, where are the kids? So we talked to the Wild Center, and they're like, yeah, we'd love to be a part of this. You go, and it's 2 days, and there's plenary sessions, there's workshops, and then you get a bunch of other time to talk to your team and make a climate action plan for your school.
We have really, really good ideas. We are really excited to do things in our school. I'm Gina Fioreli. I am from Saranac Lake. I go to Saranac Lake High School. Our meetings are, everybody is really, really energetic, and they're really passionate about it too. It's really great to have support like that, people around me who know how I feel and feel the same way.
My name is Cody Bary. I'm from Lake Placid. I'm 16. For most of my high school and middle school career, I've really been involved in the environmental club and looking for ways to make new innovations that can help our world proceed without harming it. My first year, my freshman year at the Youth Climate Summit, really opened my eyes. I mean, I knew there was this huge problem with global warming and that climate change was a major issue. We figure out what our jobs are and what we want to accomplish, and then we go to the Youth Summit and find ways to accomplish our goals. It's as simple as that.
You can talk about climate change and 1 and 2 degrees difference, but rivers rising. Other places you sympathize, you don't empathize so much, you can't feel it. And then Irene came and we felt it here.
So to help us prepare for this year's Youth Climate Summit, our teachers helped us arrange some field trips and meet experts in water resources, agriculture, and energy to learn more about how people are starting to adapt to climate change.
Yeah. Well, and even on June 28th, some part of the road was flooded of this year. You want to walk so we don't step on all the shrubs down this way? Here we are on the east branch of the Ausable that starts up in the headwaters of the high peaks, comes down through through St. Hubert's, through Keene Valley, onto Keene, and then joins with the west branch that comes from Lake Placid in Ausable Forks. In Irene, about 15 feet of soil was lost into the river, and rivers move, and that's sort of a natural thing, but in this case we sort of thought that number one, there's no vegetation here to hold on to the soil, and that's because of the land use history of the past. Number two, the water is moving more quickly through the system because of human development upstream. This might be a place that it makes sense to sort of slow down the process of erosion. You see those trees? You would see that same thing here. The bottom of trees, essentially under us, is like Lincoln logs. One tree stacked up next to the other, and then on top of that, the other way, perpendicular. So this whole stretch here is that structure, which is called a tow wood structure. And it's essentially trying to take the energy of the river and absorb it. Instead of, if you were to put rock here, it might hold this bank for a little while, but it would deflect that energy downstream.
They top it with dirt, shrubs, grass, and willow cuttings was what she had on the farm there. And it ends up growing and looks really awesome in the process.
Will the roots from the willow cuttings and other trees, as well as shrubs, kind of hold this place in ground, or is this kind of an experiment?
This project will hold. I think what we expect is that erosion will still happen because we're still here on the outside of a meander bend. It just will not happen in the same degree as it once did.
What you saw, especially with the flooding in the area, was people coming together. You're seeing people start to carpool and do the little things that do help.
The things that we do in our community matter, and they matter for morale and they matter for awareness, getting people in the community to realize global issues. But real change has to happen at a national level. I still believe that. Governments can affect in one day what grassroots efforts do in 10 years. It's a combination. I think that starting in our communities but working our way up to the government level is what's going to affect positive change.
They were here. From an Ausable River Association perspective, we really think a lot about education. And what we heard here after Irene was we wanted to do the right thing, but we didn't know what it was.
We approached Keene Valley, and at that point the river, or Johns Brook actually, had exceeded its banks and was running down the middle of the road in Keene Valley. So at that point, I realized, we really have an issue, we have a problem.
This is one of the major arteries into the Adirondacks, and so worried about transportation to and from the hospital and very important critical services. And so in the spirit of sort of making sure that this area was not flooded, folks went up the stream with excavators, with bulldozers, and kind of cleared the area out.
Any town supervisor or municipal leader had to make a decision what they felt was best to remove debris, remove boulders, remove rocks, bank stabilization. And, the municipal leaders did what they thought was best.
As a result, about a half a mile of stream has been sort of what we call channelized. It's a U-shaped channel, which is not the natural shape of a channel. And it doesn't move water, and more importantly, sediment, in the way that it really ought to. What unfortunately has happened here is that water moves faster through the system now and actually has more erosive power than it did before. Basically, streams should have this shape in a cross-section, where there's a deep section for when it's low flow. So when there's not much water in the channel, if it's spread over a big distance, it goes slower and it drops sediment.
A river system is a complex, dynamic, living system that includes woody debris, rocks, sediment transport, fish, wildlife, all kinds of things that are all part of that community moving through the valley. Complex problems cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. so it's actually a little counterintuitive of how to put it back. But when you're thinking about sediment transport and you're thinking about the whole system, suddenly, oh man, why didn't I think of that?
Now we're just trying to put it back to what it would look like naturally, and to sort of speed it along in its evolution.
In the past, in years, as the town evolved, people built along the river because they used the river for transportation and moving logs and for their livelihood. And of course now, they need to move away. We need to get away from the high waters because with the weather change, it appears that we're going to have more frequent storms.
aesthetic-wise, you couldn't find a better location to put a home or a business. But are we building in an area that's not safe anymore? And we have to be smarter. We have to build in areas that won't be prone to any additional floodwaters.
Community integrity and the community well-being and the economic well-being is largely dependent on this ecological well-being, and I think it's about embracing the both together and not seeing them as mutually exclusive, and I think that's where we're all headed.
At the beginning of this whole project, we were learning a lot about the water and how Hurricane Irene and Hurricane Sandy both affected this area pretty drastically. Then we started to look into agriculture and how we're adapting as a community to agriculture practices and how we need to change those to adapt to the changing climate.
For agriculture, we're making choices what to plant each year. We're making choices about varieties and whole crops. So there will be a lot of challenges. At a global level, there's a very, very general rule of thumb for how climate change is going to affect water resources. It seems a little unfair, but the wet areas of the globe tend to get wetter and the dry areas tend to get drier. Here in New York, temperatures are increasing and have increased a couple degrees Fahrenheit already. Certainly we've had large yield losses to droughts in the last few years. There are studies that go back and forth about how some of our main crops like corn, how far can you raise the temperature before you start just getting inherent yield losses. There's a good potential that if we get substantial heating over the next 50 years, and if the rainfall does become more sporadic in its distribution, irrigation will become essential. I think farmers have had even more trouble with flooding. Areas that they were told only flooded every 100 years or 500 years have flooded 3 times this decade. One of the adaptations that gets put forward for how farmers would deal with climate change is diversifying crops. An important issue if the climate continues to show the variability that it has for the last few years. Having a more diversified holding is one way to protect against that. Cabbages, sweet corn, onions, string beans, fruit crops, so lots of apples and grapes, the wine industry. We're developing a reputation around the world for our white wine. But those are wines that like cool growing conditions. So as we go through the century, we may see a real shift in some of those areas. And for all of those perennial crops, you're planting 10, 20 years, 30-year, long-term time horizon. How well are they going to perform, not just today, but a few decades from now. There will be opportunities for whole new crops. Things that maybe we didn't have a long enough growing season for and didn't have enough heat to develop well. Maybe some of those things will grow better in New York. In the context of climate change, natural ecosystems and forests sequester a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere and tie it up in the tree trunks and the litter and the soil organic matter. There's more carbon around the globe in the soils than there is in the atmosphere.
Thanks to all of you for turning out today. Happy Food Day. The first P is passion. You need to be absolutely passionate and enthusiastic and fired up about whatever it is that you want to do. Passion is about finding that thing that makes you come alive. I'm Roger Dwarin, and I'm the founder of Kitchen Gardeners International. The food system is actually one of the largest contributors to climate change. That our way of eating, our way of growing food, it has a really big climate footprint. A lot of people refer to the food system now as being broken or somehow sick. The challenge that we face is to not only make agriculture more local and make food more local, but we need to make it smaller. We're really talking about something that we put in place just over the course of the past 50, 60 years, where we have become detached from where food is actually produced.
Growing food in California and moving it to New York isn't exactly the most sustainable thing. Obviously, you have to pay for the food to be grown, and then you have to pay for that food to be transported across the country or sometimes across the world.
By the end of the day, we were just full of ideas, and they gave us some really good tools to follow through with those ideas. I feel that it's definitely my time to take on some of this responsibility. So in addition to expanding our school garden, we also are hoping to build a greenhouse at the school and use some of the things that we grow in the greenhouse in our cafeteria.
The average biteful of food in the United States travels, let's say, over 1,500 miles from field to fork, from plot to plate. So that system really was built for sort of a different time, and we're no longer there anymore. Maybe this next generation of young people or farmers can perhaps make some progress where they can look at systems and say, okay, how can we have a truly sustainable regional food system?
At Fledging Crow, I had a lot of fun actually. Going out to a farm and just sitting in dirt, digging up a bunch of roots doesn't sound fun, but when you're there in a field with a ton of other people, it was like a big family. You come together and you see how your work can benefit not only yourself, but other people at the end of the day.
Nice, yeah, just jump right in.
So this is Fledging Crow Vegetables. My partner Ian and I, we leased this land from a gentleman named Dr. Marco Turco. He's a professor up at SUNY Plattsburgh, and he's a farmer as well. He raises cattle and sheep here, which is super beneficial for us. It kind of helps bring things close circle. We're using the CSA model, we're using the wholesale model, and we're also using the farmer's market model to try to make it possible to serve everyone's needs.
Local farms are important in a lot of ways. Fighting industrial farming is a hefty task. Seeing how food is produced on a local scale, on a healthy, organic scale, is really important and valuable in the fight against climate change.
Fledging Crow is, my mom actually put it really well the other day. She said that the most beautiful thing about this place in her eyes is that we're not only cultivating vegetables, but we're cultivating people, and we're cultivating relationships, we're cultivating communities. Which is really kind of our goal, ultimately.
It is really hard to grow food here because we have such a short growing season, but if we can utilize the forest that we have to make different foods that we're not used to but are still really good for us, then that's where we should be heading.
Forest farming was introduced to me earlier this year actually in a college level course I was taking. It's really interesting. What you generally do is go into a woods, go into a forested area much like the Adirondacks, and you use the trees as ways to protect your crop, but also as a means to intersperse plants. One of our main issues whenever anyone says climate change is everyone thinks carbon. Trees take in carbon naturally.
65% of this state is forest. Most of that is privately owned. Everyone understands that forests, natural forests, are an important part of our ecosystems. What's happened in the last couple of decades is what we are now calling forest farming, which has to do with growing a range of different non-timber forest crops beneath this established canopy. And there was a movement in North America, so-called tree-based agriculture, where a couple of pioneers, including the fellow named Smith and McDaniels, who was the founder of the McDaniels Nut Grove, advocated growing trees in parts of the U.S. that were not suited for field agriculture.
we've been doing this class and just kind of slowly, you know, shifting it and adding more crops and just kind of working with it. It's very unique to start with an 80-year-old nut forest that someone planted as a site to play in. You know, that's pretty special. We look at forest farming and agroforestry entirely as a complement to conventional agriculture. We're not trying to get everybody to stop growing corn and start growing chestnuts right away, but we could plant a row of chestnuts in between rows of corn and start to transition to something that's a little more perennial and a little more resilient and stable.
Agroforestry is a broader term. It's an umbrella, so to speak, which has to do generally with growing trees and crops together. More specifically, it's broken down into 5 practices: forest farming, but also alley cropping, growing rows of trees with other crops in between; riparian buffers, that is growing trees and shrubs in the bank of a stream to prevent erosion; windbreaks, to mitigate wind, and that improves cattle performance and crops grow better when the wind isn't too strong; and finally, silvopasture, and that involves grazing cattle and other livestock beneath a forest canopy. We grow a variety of crops in the forest farm beneath the canopy of an established forest. These fall into certain categories: medicinals, food crops, ornamental crops. The most important of the medicinal crops would be American ginseng. Another crop that we find fairly lucrative is mushrooms. Cultivated mushrooms like shiitake is the most important.
What's great about working with Ken is he's both into the concept, and then he's like, well, I'm going to do the research to back this stuff up. And shiitake culture is an Asian product. It's grown in a very different climate. There's a lot of questions, and so he spent 10 years researching this stuff and figuring out what works. And which is why now we have 50 growers in the Northeast that are growing mushrooms and starting to make money doing that, you know. And so it's because of this end product, but it's also because of that dedicated work.
Most fruit crops, that is trees and shrubs, berries and so forth, are not particularly well adapted to growing under shade. But there are some that are reasonably well adapted to low light conditions and are suitable for forest farming. One of these is the pawpaw, which is a Native American fruit most people aren't familiar with.
Pawpaws actually, when they're ripe, they kind of look like a beat up, bruised banana, but this is actually when they're perfect. And it's one of the limitations of them as a commercial crop because they just can't actually be shipped that easily. So what we're looking at is harvesting, getting them out to markets as quickly as possible, and then doing value added, making jams, freezing the pulp, that kind of thing. It resembles very much both in the fruit and the vegetation a tropical plant for sure. So that's what it looks like, and honestly the best way to eat it is with a spoon, just like custard. Eat it right out of the shell, pick the seeds out, and it's quite a dessert, you know, really on its own. You know, when we think about climate change, I mean, the ecosystems that are resilient in the face of flooding, high rain events, droughts, all those kind of things, tend to be wetlands and forests.
Why we're here today is to determine whether or not this forest that we're standing in is old growth, has the characteristics. So those are the things that you're going to be focusing on as we go through. And when Jerry joins us, he's going to talk to you more about the numbers and what those numbers mean for the Adirondack Park in general. If we're going to be trying to be a carbon neutral model for the world, we need to know what's the capability of absorbing carbon, because then we know how much we can put out there. I'm Tammy Morgan, and I teach AP Environmental Science and Biology at Lake Placid High School. To me, the worst day in the field is better than the best day inside, because outside they're physically experiencing it, they're not just hearing it. And sometimes I see the eyes glazing over, but when I'm outside, that doesn't happen. There's more buy-in when they can actually do the work themselves.
This is where things are changing, and to see that firsthand, to see it rather than just hear it, it makes it so much more real.
They see the benefit of
having that?
My name's Sean Reynolds. I'm a senior forester with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Forests are a huge carbon resource, both in deposited carbon that we're seeing here on the forest floor that's decomposing, and in their ability to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Managing forest resources properly directly relates to the carbon cycle, and so that's why forests are a critical part of the discussion when it comes to issues like climate change.
We can say that the climate's changing, but if we have people like Jerry Jenkins to back up with data, they're seeing things that they couldn't see otherwise. Jerry Jenkins is a climate scientist, and those are the kinds of people we need to really make an educated movement.
This is a forest that has been on this land without humans doing very much for it for 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 years, something like that. So it's one of the oldest forests in the planet, and certainly one of the oldest in the country. We're individually connected to it from drawing value, immediate value from the forests. But the other value is the carbon in all of these forests. And as long as no one charges you to put carbon in the air, as long as you don't pay a tax when you burn oil or coal or when you mine it, there's no official value to the trees for taking that carbon out. What can the Adirondacks do? By themselves, nothing, because it's a world problem and they're a tiny part of the world. As long as fossil fuel users and makers don't have to pay for the damage it does to the planet, it's going to be very profitable, and they're going to be mining it like mad. So the solution is not politically simple, but it's economically very simple. When you use a gallon of fossil fuel, you and the people that got it out of the ground have to make it pay for the damage it does. The only people that can do that are government, and actually governments working together, because that's a world problem. We don't get out of this as a planet until it costs you money to put carbon in the air. There is no other solution. I have great admiration for what you all are going to do, and quite frankly, I'm sorry that the world that is being handed on to you is in such danger. I would much rather my generation have given you a world that wasn't in bad danger, but we didn't. And just a message, the problem is solvable.
When the museum opened in 2006, that was the idea of one person to tell the natural history of the Adirondacks. And our mission is to ignite an enduring passion for the Adirondacks, where people and nature can thrive together and set an example for the world. And so that's what we strive to do. And a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing every day at your school is part of setting that example. And the Youth
My name's
Summit,
Jen Kretzer, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Wild Center. How can we build greener in the Adirondacks? How can we save energy? Energy efficiency is a huge issue. Our building has always been thought of as a demonstration building, as a model. We wanted to showcase what green building could look like.
During the Youth Summit itself, you'll be working with kids from 30 other high schools and colleges across the North Country to create a more sustainable place. So I'm really psyched that you're all here today, and I'm excited to show you a little bit about what this building and this place has been able to do in terms of green building and sustainability. So
the Wild Center is a Silver LEED museum, which is leadership in energy and environmental design, and we were the first museum in New York State to get this certification. So throughout our 31-acre campus, we have all these different components to help showcase the things that we've done.
this is a pellet boiler. It's an old shipping container that's been turned on its side. and it's filled with pellets. We put this in a couple years ago, and since then it's saving the museum somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 to $40,000 a year in energy costs. So instead of burning fossil fuels, we use pellets instead. And what happens is that the pellets are pushed down into the boiler system in the basement of the Wild Center, and then they're burned, and it's a very, very efficient gasification system, which just means that, you know, how many of you have wood stoves? Anybody here have a wood stove? I have a wood stove too. And so when you burn that wood, it really just burns once. So what this boiler does is actually burns it 3 times. In each stage of burning, different amounts of energy are released, and it continues to capture that energy and use that energy to heat the building. Just a really cool way of being an alternative fuel that is very prevalent here. So all of the pellets actually are from a plant up in Messina, which is not that far away. It's within a couple hours, and then that helps heat our buildings. So we're using less fossil fuel.
We also have our composting toilet, our eco pavers, which help to prevent runoff in a parking lot or on a street. We also have a really interesting water recycling system so that the water from our exhibits eventually ends up in our pond, our solar panel array, and our green roof. One of the things as being a model for demonstrating green building is thinking about, well, how can we also showcase that we're doing it here in a commercial site, but can it be done in a home site? When we learned that Larry Masters was building his LEED Platinum house, we really wanted to showcase that house. The process of creating a LEED Platinum house in the Adirondacks and then have that available on our website so that anyone can go on and watch that.
I'm Larry Master. I'm a zoologist, retired conservation biologist. I spent almost my whole career working for the Nature Conservancy and for NatureServe, which is a spin-off of the Conservancy. I'm retired about 5 years now, 6 years. Welcome to the house. This is a net zero house. Do you know what that means?
I don't.
It means over the course of the year we generate more electricity than we need for heating and cooling and lights and everything else. For energy, we're generating our own power through solar panels. The solar provides all our electricity. We're tied to the grid, so in the wintertime we take some from the grid, and other times we provide more over the course of the year than we take. The heat, hot water, is provided by geothermal.
Are there still emissions emitted from the geothermal energy, or are there
no emissions?
No emissions at all?
No.
That's awesome.
Net zero really means also there's no net carbon emissions once you finish the house. All the water that falls in impermeable surfaces like the roof is collected, and it's collected, half of it's collected in 2 cisterns that gravity feed our garden. The other half is collected in water gardens. The driveway we've made into a permeable surface by having a special permeable covering. Another thing is to use locally sourced products. You don't want to pay the energy cost in terms of climate change and carbon, in terms of getting your materials from a long distance away. All the wood is locally sourced within New York, or I think the furthest we got is New Hampshire. A lot of it's cedar. It wasn't locally sourced, it was recycled. So the floors, all the floors are recycled from old factories and barns. The cabinets in the kitchen and the bathroom are also recycled. That's wormy chestnut, the floors are oak. The lights are almost all LED, there's some compact fluorescence. LEDs, the technology, happily, just as we were finishing the house, has really come a long ways. And they're very dimmable. They produce warm light now. The cost has come down quite a bit and continues to come down. I wanted to build a house that was an example for builders, for contractors, for homeowners looking to build or remodel. Not that they would do everything we did in this house, which is kind of over the top and crazy, but I wanted to do everything just to show what could be done, with the hopes that some people would say, oh, well, I can do solar or geothermal. I mean, the greenest house is one you don't build, right? So. But if you're going to build a house, and we wanted to build a house for our retirement, live in forever, and pass on to our kids, I wanted to do it in a way that it would produce no net carbon once it's built in the atmosphere. And so that was our goal.
just about any building that we step into, we see opportunities for cost-effective savings. And that, we're not talking about 5% savings or 10% savings, we're talking 40, 50, 60% or more. With our own building, we've reduced our energy use by 75%. And we've done it just by insulating the walls, insulating the attic, replacing the furnace, replacing the water heater, weather stripping the windows. We have a geothermal heating and cooling system. We have a novel desiccant air conditioning system that uses geothermal cooling. The geothermal that we use here, we're circulating water down about 200-300 feet. In the summertime, it's absorbing heat from the building and rejecting that heat down to the ground. And in the wintertime, it does exactly the opposite. It absorbs heat from the ground and it puts it in the building. I really think that the whole issue of designing green buildings starts with the community. What kind of a community do we want to live in? An approach that we might call design from the outside in. A nice example is Eco-Village at Ithaca. It's a beautiful setting overlooking town, but it's close to the urban core. And so we're avoiding those long-distance commutes. We want to try and retain some of the trees and other natural vegetation. We want to look near the building at things like overhangs, how overhangs could protect the building and reduce the need for air conditioning. And then move into the building, how the walls are designed, how the windows are designed, what shape the building is in. Somewhat more solid, simpler building lines can reduce energy use without adding any additional insulation to the walls. The sizes and locations of windows, lighting, very, very important. And then renewable energy. Once we've gotten our energy needs down to a minimum, hopefully there's enough space on the roof or on the site for some solar panels for hot water or electricity. And then hopefully we can use the roof to collect rainwater, filter it, and use it for our water needs. So the idea is to reduce our needs, energy and water, to a minimum, and then meet those needs with renewable sources. We're seeing more activity at the municipality and town level. They themselves are improving their own building stock. And then at the state level, state agencies are trying to serve as a catalyst by disseminating ideas, by disseminating best practices. And the installations are happening in a way that delivers savings.
My name is Fred Monroe. I'm the supervisor of the town of Chester. I had always had the misconception that it wasn't that feasible here in, at this latitude, solar projects. That's really not true. It is very feasible here, and and we do very well with solar. With the state grants, they pay 60 to 70% of it. There's federal tax credits of 30% of the project, and then there's state tax credits of $5,000 per building. So I thought, wow, that sounds great. But the only thing is, we're a municipality. So how does it work if you're a municipality? There are private investors and engineering companies and installers that are interested in financing it. They get the tax credits and they will finance the whole thing. And you had no upfront investment, so it seems to me like a no-brainer. We did 4 major sites. The first one was at our transfer station, which is where our solid waste goes. And then we decided to do our town hall. Then we just built a new health center a few years ago, so we decided to do one there. And then we also have a town ski area. I estimate someplace between 350,000 and 400,000 pounds a year for all of these savings of CO2. So I think it's pretty substantial. Basically, I've always seen myself as being conservative and don't like to see a lot of government intervention. But I think this is one area where you do need that. I think government works best when it does what people aren't really able to accomplish by themselves. And so if this is for an important goal like this, I think it is something that makes sense to have it subsidized.
You good?
All right, we're gonna bushwhack over here. It's not too much of a bushwhack because it's a little bit of a trail. Here's as good a place as any.
I'm Kurt Stager, a professor at Paul Smith's College here in the Northern Adirondacks. My main research is in environmental change over long time periods, going back centuries to thousands of years.
Instead of rotting, like would happen out in the woods or something, the acids that come out of this naturally preserve the dead stuff.
In order to put the changes that are happening now into a proper context, to sort of tell what's caused by people and what's what you might call natural, it's important to first have a historical perspective on climate change.
This is a tool for poking all the way down through all the dead mosses, back through time, decades, then centuries, then thousands of years. Screw these extra rods on top, like that, till in some cases you can get back all the way to the Ice Age. You want this to go down in, and then we're gonna turn it. There you go, whatever you do, don't let go. Now do another stab. Give it a good push.
Once you get the long-term historical perspective down, and you also get the more short-term, let's say, from my perspective, short-term would be decades or a century or so of observations of what's going on. The next thing is, okay, now what's coming at us in the near future?
Okay, how about one more?
Okay, hold on. Cody, get off my foot.
I am not on your foot.
Last stab.
2, 3.
Ugh.
Oh, I went in that angle.
Let's hope we hit the bottom with this one.
Up.
There you go. So now, yep, just roll that open and there you go. So this stuff is thousands of years old, and it's the same stuff as this that's been lying there for about 7,000 years. And you could see if the climate changed. Like this looks like it's more like a grassy, weedy kind of thing rather than the moss, which might mean there was another kind of vegetation here at the time. If we're going back into a warmer climate of our own making, this can tell you what we may be heading into in terms of rainfall and snowfall and things like that. So the big concern here is it going to get wetter or drier in a warmer future? Most of the models say wetter.
Something we can all do is to learn about what's going on. One of the important things now that climate change is happening where we live, wherever we are in the world, it's important for people to sort of get together with their different areas of expertise and their different interests and collaborate, because nobody can really know or understand every aspect of the world they live in.
Larry Masters' house is really great because not only is it a LEED certified building, it's also open to other people to come in and research climate.
He has this beautiful amount of land that he uses as a nature preserve. He lets scientists come and look as well as study the animals that are there.
So the goals of this site as a climate research station are to encourage research out here, the monitoring of both interactions with species and their phenology, when birds return in the spring, when amphibians are mating and calling, and when plants are bud breaking and so forth. Monitor that over time. All the data will be publicly available for researchers, for other landowners to use who are grappling with how to adapt to a changing climate. Push that in. Okay, I may have to get a different net because this one is somehow got really tangled. What we're going after are saw-whet owls, and this is the peak of their migration in the second, third week in October up to this latitude. And they nest all the way down at least to Pennsylvania, West Virginia, but the ones further north migrate south in the winter to the southern Appalachians. And there's a whole network of saw-whet owl banding stations across the country, actually. And they all communicate via listserv. And for most songbirds, there's a very low recapture rate. That is, birds that have been banded that caught again. But for saw-whet owls, it's really high. And I think that might be because we're drawing them in from some distance with a tape. It's a tape of their call. The owls will come in when we're standing right here.
Really?
We've sometimes been in the process of extracting it out from the net, and 2 more will fly in as we're doing it.
Oh, I thought you...
Oh, it isn't now.
Oh, it is now. Oh, okay. It's holding onto the net. Which we like to do.
These owls are getting lost. They're coming back because they think it's getting warmer. Owls don't have really a sense of seasons. They know, oh yeah, it's getting colder, I need to go elsewhere. When climate's really changing from one day it's 70 degrees, next day it's 40, next day it's 70, it confuses us just as much as it confuses animals, and animals more so.
And imagine if a bunch of other animals too, their habits are changing, and it's just kind of like a domino effect. Everything's interconnected.
So, and then we look at the eye color. And we're using these paint strips, which are standardized across all of Project Owl nets. Think that one, Tammy?
It's up at 322, yeah.
Yep, that's what I was thinking.
They're getting it through their science classes. They're probably getting the message for the first time when they're in middle school. And then in each of their sciences, they're getting another piece of that puzzle, a piece of that information string. And so by the time they're seniors, they know that it's real. They know that it's human-related or anthropogenic. And they know that it's serious.
The environmental area is actually growing. That's where, I believe that's where a lot of young people need to invest their attention, and so.
You know, it has to be the future. I mean, it just has to be. We can't go on, you know, doing what we're doing, have been doing. Yes.
Yeah.
Our students are like, we have to do this ourselves. We're done with this society that's reliant on foreign fuels. We want more localized economies. We want community action. And that's what I like about the Youth Summit, is it really does focus on those solutions. What can we do in our little pocket? How can we make a difference?
You guys really are the leaders in this climate movement. You are the people that are stepping up and changing the game. But you gotta do it with enthusiasm. You gotta get fired up. Let's make some noise. Fired up! Fired up! Ready to go!
There is scientific evidence that shows that climate change is happening.
It's important to take responsibility for our actions, and so if you can share that knowledge with other people, that'll make a positive influence on the world.
We are the generation to do that, and I think the summit is a great way to start.
I'd say the hardest part of the Youth Summit is probably following up, making your actions a reality, but through the work you get to do through the 2 days and making a strong plan, all your goals can actually be achieved.
How do we engage the next generation? How do we activate the energy for the transformation that's needed? How do we do the work on the ground? This is what everyone wants to know.
One of the reasons I think this strange term Anthropocene, or age of humans, is so important, because it really kind of helps you feel like you're a special person in a special generation living in a special time in history. We have a lot of work to do in the Anthropocene, and with these important environmental issues and, of course, social economic issues also happening at the same time. The contents of our minds and our hearts are really important now, because we influence other people with our attitudes and our actions.
We really need to reflect, to take a moment to breathe into the sense that we are part of something much larger, more mysterious, and bring forward humility and a sense of what is our partnership with these processes of nature. It is befriending the Earth community in a new way, to say these creatures, these ecosystems have their own intelligences, and we need to understand that. You know, people want to have a sense that their life matters. The great work It's what drives the creation of civilization, a sense that you're creating something for future generations, where the students realize their contributions will matter. Their creativity is boundless. We need to have a sense that what we're doing is contributing to a great work that has a larger potential for transformation.
Every generation has their big turning point. You saw it with the previous generation with the world wars. This is our turning point. This is the story that we're writing. We're writing the story of how the humans saved the Earth. And we want to be known for that, not known that we destroyed it.
This program is made possible in part by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, using innovation and technology to solve some of New York's most difficult energy and environmental problems. And by
Paul Smith College, the only four-year college in New York's 6 million-acre Adirondack Park. More than 20 majors in topics including forestry, natural resources, sustainability, hospitality, culinary arts, and more. Online at paulsmiths.edu.
And the Lake Champlain Basin Program. And with the generous support of these donors.